Chapter 1. Micah. Snow clung to the ironwork gate when Micah Cade stepped out of the black sedan. He drew a deep breath, the cold mountain air stinging his lungs, then retrieved his bags from the trunk. The driver didn't offer to help. He knew better. After giving the man $100 bill, Micah turned to the stone facade he'd dreaded setting eyes on for the past 3 years. The Cade mansion crouched under the Telluride Mountains. It screamed luxury with the heated brick drive, the yawning 3-story windows, and the regal arched entryway. Micah shuddered. He hadn't missed this place. Not even once. If it weren't for Gracie, he likely wouldn't have come back, or even given it a second thought. That wasn't completely true. He'd talked with his brothers. Varric, mostly. He'd always been the most rational of the 4 of them. A few months ago, Alec had dropped off the map without a word. And Silas? Something twinged beneath his ribs. Yes, he would have come back for Silas. Guilt settled at his core as it always did when he thought of Silas and Alec. Alec was his twin. He should have missed him more than anyone else. And maybe it was the way his father always told them they needed to be close that had driven them apart. He'd given them both something to rebel against. Micah adjusted his scarf under his wool coat and marched to the door. Even moving to the other side of the country, Washington, D.C., he hadn't fully escaped his roots. His boots were simple, but they were still Italian leather, soft as butter. His watch was minimalist, brushed steel with no ornaments, but it did have the Rolex logo branded against his skin. Politicians smelled money on a person faster than he smelled fear. Considering he could sense a quickening heartbeat or a prickle on someone's neck from 100 meters away. That was wrong. Considering he could sense a quickening heartbeat or a prickle on someone's neck from hundreds of meters away, that was impressive. Playing their games was a means to an end, and today, it was time for the end. He thought about knocking, but instead turned the handle and pushed the front door oh my gosh, okay, take a breath. He thought about knocking, but instead turned the handle and pushed the front door open. It was unlocked, as he knew it would be. Anyone stupid enough to walk into this house intending to cause harm would find out soon enough that they were the prey, not predator. Warmth spilled out onto the step, and Micah's childhood memories tumbled into his head along with the scent of cedar and lemon oil. "Mr. Cade, you're back early." A flustered woman dressed in black, her silvering hair pulled into a severe bun at the base of her neck, clutched her dusting rag and looked him up and down. Micah grinned. "You're welcome." He dropped his bags and rushed in, sweeping Miss Marin up into a hug. She was smaller than he'd remembered, her bones more frail. She spluttered and pushed against his shoulders. He set her back on the floor and gave her a wink as she tried to put herself back together. She made a sound in her throat when she realized he'd already started off down the tiled hall. Her heels clicked against... Her heel clicks echoed through the vaulted space, and he couldn't help but smile. She'd been the caretaker here since before he was born, and he loved her like his own mother. Though he didn't know exactly what that was supposed to feel like. He barely remembered what his mother looked like. Miss Marin finally caught up. "He's not ready for you. I don't care." Micah walked faster. If Gregor Cade wouldn't make an adjustment in his schedule for his own son, then he'd be a pain in his father's ass until he decided to accommodate. Micah had only tolerated his assignment for the past 3 years to arrive at this moment, and he wouldn't be put off a second longer. He was only sorry Miss Marin was caught in the crossfire. "Mr. Cade." Micah whirled, dropping his large hands on the woman's shoulders. He froze, whipping his head to scan the hall. That scent. It was hers. Mate. His wolf lunged, battering the back of his ribs. Micah clutched at his chest, struggling to catch his breath. What the hell was Gracie's scent doing in this hall? "Mr. Cade." "Don't call me that. It's Micah." Miss Marin pulled at his hands and he dropped them. His chest heaved, blood rushing in his ears. I'll deal with him, I promise. You don't have to protect me. He couldn't think. He had to find her. Had his father brought her here to surprise him upon his return? It would be the first time Gregor Cade had given him anything. Miss Marin chewed her lower lip. It's not you I'm worried about. Micah frowned. Then voices lifted inside the council chamber and his hackles raised. Whatever she was worried about would have to wait. He needed answers. He took a step, but Miss Marin grabbed his hand and pressed something into his palm. Micah blinked at the ring in his hand a moment before recognition took hold. It was his signet. His mother had made each of the boys a ring before she died. He hadn't seen it since he was a kid. Where did you... In your father's study. I was cleaning. Saved it for you. Warmth bloomed in his chest. He slipped the ring onto his finger, then lunged for the doors, slamming them open. The room was exactly as he'd left it. Floor-to-ceiling windows along the back wall, framing the mountains behind them. The table, carved from a single slab of flawless obsidian, showed a glassy reflection of the books on the shelves lining the walls. Micah didn't have to scan the room to know exactly who sat in the oak chairs surrounding the council table. Council table? Gregor Cade stood at the head of the table in a oh, wait. No, I started too late. One sec. Micah didn't have to scan the room to know exactly who sat in the oak chairs surrounding the council table. Their sharp, bitter scents gave them away. He looked only at his father as... Oh, wait, one sec. As he postured. Okay, yep. Let me do that one more time. Surrounding the council table. Okay. Micah didn't have to scan the room to know exactly who sat in the oak chairs surrounding the council table. Their sharp, bitter scents gave them away. He looked only at his father as he postured opposite him. Gregor Cade stood at the head of the table in a tailored charcoal suit and a lilac silk tie, his expression carved into polite amusement. His eyes dropped to his son's hand, his nostrils flaring, when he saw the ring on his finger. Micah, what a pleasant surprise. You weren't expected until... Spare me? Micah didn't raise his voice, but it was more of a growl than he'd intended. Patience. His father wouldn't respond to flares of emotion. He shrugged out of his coat and draped it over the empty chair in front of him. You know why I'm here. Gregor's gaze sharpened. This isn't the time. I've spent 3 years fulfilling a contract you signed. 3 years protecting systems that rot from the inside out, so yes, this is precisely the time. He left out the part about 3 years of longing, 3 years of loneliness, 3 years of agony waiting for his mating bond. Now he scented her in the house. He hadn't been allowed to talk with her at the risk of their mating bond snapping into place while he was away. Mate sickness wasn't survivable. Mate sickness wasn't survivable, not for that length of time, and he had to fulfill the requirements to earn his inheritance, for both their sakes. Gregor's mouth curled. Damn it. He was around shifters now. He had to mask his emotions. You seem agitated, Gregor purred. Wouldn't it be best if Miss Marin took you to your room? I want what was promised to me. Micah leaned forward and pressed his palms against the cool tabletop. There will be no need for me to stay the night. When he'd left, he still held some respect for his father, for his family name. The Cade family had worked alongside humans for years, helping stabilize governments, protecting states and countries from corrupt and evil men. But now, after being privy to the inner workings of those deals, Micah was well aware that his father's work wasn't born out of altruism. Micah was well aware that his father's work wasn't born out of altruism. The Cade money and influence came at a cost. Gregor laughed, and a murmur swept the room. Oh, is that all? And this will be simple. Harlan, please. Gregor held out a hand. Harlan Voss, Gregor's beta, stood, handing him the tablet in front of... Handing, da-da-da. There we go. That's better. Harlan Voss, Gregor's beta, stood, passing the tablet in front of him. The man had always been a tank, strong and compact, but now the lines of his face had hardened. His eyes had dulled. Micah grew up inside the pack hierarchy, had learned it the way other boys learned local politics. At the top stood the High Alpha, Gregor, whose authority and will shaped territory, policy, and who oversaw the survival and flourishing of the shifters in the western United States. Harlan was Gregor's enforcer, gatekeeper, the hand that closed before dissent ever reached his father's throat. Beneath them sat ranked alphas and senior wolves, each tethered to assets, regions, or council functions. And at the bottom were omegas, officially protected and much needed for mating bonds and pack stability. Half of the estate, in the form of our assets in the Pacific Northwest, holdings, territories. Gregor scrolled on the screen, then looked up. Am I missing anything, son? Micah worked to keep his heart rate even. Too easy. This wasn't what he'd anticipated. His father had to abide by the terms of his inheritance, but he'd expected more of a fight to get it signed over. He grunted. Let me read it. Gregor's grin widened. You don't trust me? You don't trust me? There were chuckles around the room as he set the tablet on the table and shoved, sending it sliding the full length of the surface. Micah had to snap his hand over it to keep it from sailing off the end onto the floor. He scrolled up to start at the top of the document, then read every line. He drew slow breaths, holding and releasing to steady his body. It was the same. The document they'd prepared before he left for D.C. He locked down the relief that washed over him. Finally, this would all be over. He would find Gracie and get her the hell out of this place, start their own pack in Seattle. Satisfied? Gregor asked. Micah nodded and passed the tablet back to his father. It seems to be in order. Of course it does. You fulfilled your duties and I wouldn't dream of breaking our agreement. I'll start the transfers immediately, though you may need to stay at least one night, since we'll need to get the paperwork... Since we'll need to get the paperwork in order? Micah nodded once. As much as he wanted to drag his bag straight back out the front door, that was reasonable. I think this calls for celebration, don't you? Gregor laughed, motioning for support from his council members and visiting alphas. There's no need, Micah started, then sucked in a breath as the door at the far end of the chamber opened. Her scent flooded through the room, like sun-warmed skin, wild ginger, and crushed peony petals. Gracie. She carried in a tray with a carafe of wine and glasses. Her dark hair was braided low at the nape of her neck. She wore simple slacks and a black high-necked sleeveless top. Her curves, her high cheekbones. He lapped up every detail like a stray kitten. Micah moved around the table, but Gregor held up a hand. Gracie didn't lift her head as she set the tray on the table, her gaze fixed on the floor. Is there anything else you need, High Alpha? Gregor smiled, then put a hand to her cheek, and the world narrowed. Micah's heart slammed once, hard enough to steal breath from his lungs. A second time, sending blood rushing through his ears. His wolf surged forward, awake and furious and starving. Don't touch her, he growled, and Gracie's eyes finally snapped to his. She gave a quick shake of her head, and her fear broke through the scent of iron flooding his mouth. It's not you I'm worried about. In an instant, he understood. The ease of his agreement, the smirk on his father's lips. Gregor was happy to give him the land. Gregor was happy to give him the land, the property, the money, because he'd already struck where it would hurt most. And Micah now knew why a son would murder his father. All right, that was chapter 1. Hello, how are you guys doing? Okay, guys, what is happening here? Is everyone being nice? I hope you are. Okay, hello. I am recording an audiobook. So this is Savage Claim. You jumped in right at the beginning chapter. That was chapter 1. We're going to go on to chapter 2. So if you have any questions, comments, pop them in the chat. And if you are just barely finding my channel right now, then you should go and check out my playlist. I have tons of free audiobooks on my channel. What? It's your birthday? Happy birthday. That's amazing. I'm so glad you're here. All right, let's do chapter 2. Okay. All right. I sound like your teacher. Hey, maybe your teacher sounds really great. I'll choose to take that as a compliment. What am I doing? I'm recording an audiobook. So we're going to do chapter 2. I always take a break at the end of each chapter. So if you have questions or comments, you can leave them there. And I have tons of audiobooks on my channel. So if you like to listen to stories, I have everything from dystopian to rom-com to fantasy. This one is a fantasy romance. So, all right, let's go. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Gracie. Earlier that day. She's barefoot again. Bare feet on cold slate, slipping out the side door of her parents' house before the dinner guests notice she's missing. She rushes past the barn and can't help but look across the valley. The Cade estate rises on the opposite ridge, all glass and stone, and even from this distance it seems like it's watching. Probably because inside, her parents are performing for the High Alpha himself. Her wolf had been agitated during the entire conversation. Gregor wanted something, but she wasn't sure what. Her father laughed. Her mother kept talking about how both of her daughters were Omegas with expected high fertility based on the testing she forced them to do before the holidays. Gregor was talking about Omegas and declining bonding rates, and she couldn't figure out what their entire pack had to do with those issues. Their bonding rates were fine as far as she knew. She excuses herself before saying something unforgivable. Now she's halfway down the slope behind the house, breath sharp in the mountain air, the lights of the town flickering below. She looks down at the flask in her hand and grins. Her father left it in the back, not wanting Gregor Cade to see. It was brewed up the canyon by shifters who don't exactly attend council dinners. She twists the cap off and takes a swallow. It hits like liquid flame in her throat, and she coughs. Running away again? A voice carries from the tree line. She rolls her eyes. I prefer the term strategic retreat. Micah steps out of the aspens like the mountains shaped him. Black shirt clinging to his shoulders, hands scraped raw from whatever the hell task Gregor made him do this time. He smells like smoke and sweat, and her blood heats. He drops his eyes to the flask. Stolen? Borrowed. Micah laughs and walks toward her. Let me try. She laughs, then spins on her heel and walks backward across the hill, arms wide. I don't want to share. Micah runs. Micah runs, and she scrambles away from him. I'm sure my parents would be glad to offer you whatever you want. Wine, food, or either of their fertile Omega daughters. Crazy. No, really. Hi, Alpha, sir. We are honored. She deepens. Oh, wait. No, really. Hi, Alpha, sir. We are honored. She deepens her voice in mockery. Our daughter is fully prepared to serve pack interests. Micah's jaw tightens. I had nothing to... Oh, wait, actually. Okay. Micah's jaw tightens. I had nothing to... She waves him off and takes another swallow, then winces as it hits. He sighs. Stop drinking that shit. Stop telling me what to do. He closes the distance between them in 3 strides and takes the flask from her before she spills it down her crew neck sweatshirt. Before she can pull away, he grips her waist. I had nothing to do with this. I haven't said a word to Gregor. She lifts an eyebrow. A word about what? When his face heats, she laughs and says, calling him by his first name doesn't change that he's your dad, by the way. He pulls her close, tipping her chin up so she has to look at him. I know you're angry. She tries to come up with a witty comment, a joke, but instead, tears well in her eyes. Her arms go slack. I'm not angry with you. Yes, you are. The tears spill over onto her cheek, and he brushes them away with his thumb. She sinks into him, dropping her head to his chest, listening to the rhythm of his heart. It's years, Micah. I know. You're too young. I don't look it. She snorts. You barely have chest hair. Micah laughs out loud. He pulls her back, sitting on a boulder and pulling her into his lap. Is that what you'll miss? My chest hair? She nods with a pout on her lips and tries to sneak the flask from his hand. He kisses her, and her blood floods with heat. She pulls back, already breathless. You could stay. I can't. But that's not how this works. Then make it work differently. She knows she shouldn't make things worse by pressuring him, but it comes out anyway. Their eyes lock. I'm sorry, she whispers. The mountain air shifts and he closes his eyes, drawing a deep breath. You make leaving so much harder. A smile curves her lips. Good. He tries to look stern, but it doesn't hold. She loves that she can make him soften. To everyone else, he's the high alpha son, but to her, well, he's everything. He slides his hand into her hair, mouth taking hers. The tip of his nose is cool from the evening air, and she sucks in a breath when it brushes her cheek. You're my mate, Gracie, he whispers. I can feel it. Something in her swells, building until her head feels as if it will burst. Me too. I'll come back, I promise. His voice blends with the wind racing down the side of the slope. She reaches for him, but her hand passes through the shape of him. No, Micah! She lunges forward and hits the ground, and Gracie surfaces from sleep. Gracie surfaced from sleep with a gasp. She blinked her eyes open, cringing at the cold sweat slicking her skin. Morning cut through the curtains in thin surgical lines, white gold light slicing across the velvet of her Omega suite. It should have been beautiful. In another life, it might have been, but beauty soured when it was caged. Another dream. What was that, 3 this week? Her body burned beneath the sheets. Not a pleasant heat. Nothing like the warmth she used to feel next to Micah. This was different. Wrong. Chemical. Her throat thickened. It had been years, and it still felt as if he'd barely left. She missed him so much. Her bones ached. Even though they didn't bond before he left, the sickness was still there. The hollow pit. Gracie groaned as she rolled to her side. Every brush of the fabric was like sandpaper against her skin, sending her nerves jittering. She peeled the blanket away, shivering in her cotton underwear and tank top despite the fever licking her bones, and planted her feet on the cool marble floor. Someone, probably Miss Marin, had left a silver, covered tray near the door. Her dosage schedule was arranged with medical precision. Gregor called them supplements. She knew better now. He'd been ramping up the dose, and not enough to force a collapse since he needed her to be functional, presentable, but enough to cow her body into submission. She wasn't even in heat yet, but it didn't matter. She was desperate, aching for a mate to the point that she could barely focus on anything else. And not just any mate. Him. Gregor had made sure his own pheromones were infused into the toxic concoctions they forced her to inject. Now her body betrayed her any time he was in her wing of the house. She stalked across the floor, swept her dark hair over her shoulder, and lifted the lid. Steam rose from scrambled eggs, sausages, and herb-roasted potatoes. Next to the white ceramic plate sat a slim glass syringe. Gracie's stomach flipped. It wasn't only his pheromones in that syringe, or she would have had no trouble setting it aside. There was something else in that liquid that made her feel alive, euphoric. The day prior, the sensation had lasted until far past lunch. She'd tried to resist it every day that week without success, and she hated herself for it. A chime sounded at the door, signaling the morning check. She crossed the room and pressed her palm to the reader. The lock released with a softened click. Jessa, the Omega bonded to Gregor's Beta, Harlan Voss, slipped inside. She must have been up for some time already because her ash blonde bob was glossy and smooth, her mascara already applied. After Alec and Micah's departure, Harlan and Jessa took up residence at the Cade mansion. Pack members, including her parents, thought it was a brilliant move on the High Alpha's part. Their pack had been spread out since its formation. Everyone living scattered in small communities in the wilderness surrounding Telluride and Ouray. Now they all lived within 20 minutes of the Cade house. Something about that rankled. Wasn't their goal to improve relationships with humans? If they lived among them, they could prove that they weren't out to steal their children or force their women into submission. Though not many humans knew of their existence in the first place. Even if they never spoke it out loud, they could sense something was different about shifter kind. They proved it by staying clear of this side of the mountains. Given her current situation, Gracie didn't blame them. Jessa's pale amber eyes darted to the untouched syringe on the tray. Her mouth turned downward before she schooled her expression. Feeling rebellious this morning? Gracie wrapped her arms around herself. I just needed a minute. Jessa nodded with a smirk. I think that's why he chose you, you know. You've never acted like an Omega. Jessa was her friend. One of 3 she'd grown close to since taking up residence here, along with Silas, Micah's half-brother, and Miss Marin. Still, she hated when Jessa talked like this. She made it sound like Gregor should be commended for choosing her and forcing her to comply with his every whim. Gracie scoffed. False. Acting like an Omega is exactly what I do. She could list 100 times where she'd submitted without a word right off the top of her head. Oh, she'd fought plenty when Gregor first brought her here. And then she learned the hard way who held all the cards in this little game they were playing. Will I be getting my run this week? Gracie asked, her heart picking up speed. The mountains were calling her. She relied on the freedom of her shifts and roaming through the foothills, but it was her connection with her sister that really kept her going. She could only talk with her pack through the bond when she was in her wolf form. Gregor only let her shift once a week. Jessa nodded. I haven't heard any different. She sighed and sat down on the bed, like she always did when she was about to give bad news. The council meets this afternoon. He wants you ready. Gracie's throat tightened. The idea of being anything for Gregor Cade made her stomach roil. Again, she thought of Micah, of her dream, his stubbled jaw, storm gray eyes. He would tear the council apart for what they were doing to her and the other Omegas. She just needed to find a way to send him word, to talk with him. Gregor had required that she not contact Micah for the second. Gregor had required that she not contact Micah from the second his assignment started. He told her that any communication between the two of them could trigger a premature bond, since he'd be emotionally unstable in his assignment. She didn't want to be the cause of an alpha breaking, did she? Don't. Jessa gave her a look. But you've been wishing you could contact Micah for what? 2.5 years now? The full 3, but who was counting? She'd tried to get Silas to do it for her, but he'd been cut off too. As far as she knew, Micah hadn't talked with anyone in their pack besides his father since he left. And Gracie, at some point... you know what? I'm going to change one thing here. She'd tried to get Silas to do it for her, but he'd been cut off too, unless his father was listening. As far as she knew, Micah hadn't talked with anyone in their pack without a chaperone since he left. Gracie, at some point... I can't accept this. It isn't right. Why am I here, Jessa? Gregor already has his heirs. Jessa sighed. He's not looking to mate. Exactly! Gracie spun to the window, her chest so tight she could barely breathe. How can you sit there and let Gregor and Harlan push this registration? Jessa sat up straight. I'm not sitting here and letting anything. I've talked with Harlan. He says they have their reasons and... Of course they do. Gracie squeezed her eyes closed. She needed to strip down and writhe on the floor to mate with the next male who walked through her bedroom door. Do it again. She needed to strip down and writhe on the floor to mate with the next male who walked through her bedroom door, or hell, even Jessa. This was something she and Jessa couldn't talk about. She was loyal to her mate. She had faith in her high alpha. Gracie did not. She was staring down the barrel of a public bond announcement. Weeks, Gregor had said last night. Weeks until she lost the last of her already fragile independence. She'd been forced into his bond testing as a way to keep her sister off the bidding floor. Since Micah left, Gregor had succeeded in implementing mass Omega registration within the Western Pax. At first, it was the gathering of information, some fertility testing. Then it was matching, scent testing, and auctioning Omegas off to whoever Gregor wanted to impress most. Her own pack members justified this. They said it was forward-thinking to use genetic matching in securing strong bonds. It was an investment in the future of the packs, a necessary evolution. Gracie saw it for exactly what it was. Alphas and betas being given a green light to compete for Omega possession, to turn them all into commodities. The youngest fertile Omegas were targeted for matching first, and when Gracie opposed, Gregor offered her a deal. Consent to the testing, and Talia remained unlisted. It hadn't even been a choice. But just like his registration program, Gregor was always 3 steps ahead. He never intended to keep her only for research, and she couldn't raise a complaint or refuse him without endangering Talia. Are you going to eat this, or... Jessa put the lid on the tray, picking the whole thing up and setting it on the table. Gracie's stomach rumbled, but the idea of taking anything, even food, felt like capitulation. Jessa blew out a breath. Starving yourself won't help. It might. It wouldn't. She'd already tried countless times and failed abysmally. Jessa snorted, then rounded the table. Yeah, okay. Jessa snorted, then rounded the table. It will be okay. She reached out, but Gracie stumbled back. Don't touch me. Her lips burned, her thighs aching and hot. Sorry, I'm just... Everything hurts. Jessa blinked, then nodded once. No, I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking. When Gracie didn't answer, she continued with, I was saying it will all be okay, Gracie. The High Alpha has a purpose in this, and... Please, don't. Gracie stormed to the window. It will be okay? What a load of horseshit. Jessa had bought into the narrative just like the rest of them. Though, she had more reason than most to align with Gregor Cade since she was bonded to his beta. It would be impossible for her to combat the loyalty there. If she did, she'd likely be looking at a stripped bond. But the rest of her pack? They were like a herd of elk surrounded by wolves. If they offered up their weak, it would give them a chance of escaping notice. They only had to convince themselves that they chose all of it. The door clicked closed as Jessa exited the room, and Gracie blew out a breath. She could have been more patient. Jessa wasn't a cruel person, but sometimes it was hard to separate the cruelty she believed in from the kind-hearted person she was underneath. Those two pieces didn't seem compatible. Gracie scratched at her burning skin, staring at the shimmering water of the pond Gracie scratched at her burning skin, staring at the shimmering water of the pond beyond the courtyard. It would be next to impossible for her to hurl herself over the edge of the balcony and travel far enough to land in the water, but it might be worth the risk. Too bad the balcony had a sensor system. She'd found that out the hard way, too. After steeping in self-loathing a little longer, actually, I said that wrong. She'd found that out the hard way. After steeping in self-loathing a little longer, she turned from the window and went straight for the syringe. All right, there we go. That was chapter 2. Hello. How are you guys doing? I'm looking at your comments here. Oh my gosh, guys. Yes, I see that you love dark romance. I love it. So fun. I know, a dream. Oh, you guys are awesome. I'm so glad you're liking this. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, guys. It is definitely Omegaverse. Let's see. Okay. Just making sure I didn't miss any questions or anything like that. I'm glad you guys are here. We're going to do chapter 3. So this is a book called Savage Claim. It is written by me. It's by one of my pen names, and I'm narrating the audio. Chapter 3. Okay, let's do one more chapter. Maybe 2. Probably just 1. Okay, let's do it. Chapter 3. If you have any questions or comments, leave it in the chat. I have all of my audiobooks on my channel. So if you like this, then you can go listen to like 50 more stories if you would like to. Okay, chapter 3. Chapter 3. Gracie. Gracie's head was fuzzy as she prepared herself the way Gregor preferred. Clean skin, her hair pulled up, a tight sweater and slacks that accentuated her hips and waist. It made her sick. But fighting wasn't working. Her only hope... No. Who was she kidding? She'd lost hope months ago. This was purely survival. She stared at herself in the mirror. Actually, I'm going to change that to weeks ago. There we go. And no. Who was she kidding? She lost hope weeks ago. This was purely survival. She stared at herself in the mirror. Her skin was pale, her eyes too bright from the chemicals braiding with her blood. She didn't recognize herself. But at least now, with pleasure coursing through her veins, she didn't exactly care. A chime sounded, and Gracie jumped, squeezing her eyes closed. She forced a deep breath and stepped into the corridor where 2 of Gregor's thugs waited. At first, she'd tried to learn their names, to connect with them on a personal level. But when they were happy to hold her down for blood testing seconds after sharing how their mate was pregnant, she decided it hurt too much to pretend they saw her as anything other than an assignment. The scent of them nearly bowled her over tonight. That was the one benefit to the dosing. Her senses were heightened since her body was convinced she was searching for a mate. Her body was on high alert for danger, sensitive and discerning. Gregor's men smelled of bitterness. Something sour? Probably from whatever new concoction they'd glutted themselves with at one of his parties. Shifters metabolized man-made drugs and alcohol at a rate too high to enjoy them. But there were plenty of shifter-made products they enjoyed thoroughly. It turned them into manic, slobbering fools. Gracie shuddered as the men escorted her toward the council chamber. The hall narrowed and the double doors stood open. Her pulse kicked as the men motioned for her to wait. Gregor had been setting webs for years, but now he wasn't even trying to pretend his plans were secret. He rarely traveled anymore and met exclusively with his own council. Not in its entirety either, only with those who agreed with him. It left her with no hope, no one to appeal to. They knew Gregor was registering Omegas. studying them and forcing them into bonds, and they did nothing. She was still dumbfounded by how quickly it had all happened. But, thinking back to that moment in her dream, she realized Gregor had been setting the groundwork for years, probably since the time he'd claimed the High Alpha seat. He'd won the hearts of the Western Pax when he challenged Amos Calder for High Alpha over 20 years ago. Gregor was young and strong, flashy and charismatic, exactly the kind of leader the Pax needed to unite them. The Alphas practically bowed at his feet after he killed Amos and took his place. But Gracie knew a truth that few others did. Micah told her, had sworn her to secrecy. Gregor believed from a young age that his bloodline held the blood of the sovereigns. He'd heard the same stories they all had as children, that years ago there had been a sovereign line, alphas born to rule by blood. Depending on who was telling the tale, the stories suggested either that the sovereigns eradicated themselves through infighting, or they were taken out by ambitious alphas who were sick of groveling. Either way, Gregor was convinced his family line held sovereign blood. After earning the High Alpha seat of the Western Pax, he bonded with 7 Omegas before mating. He believed one of them was the key to activating his blood, and when none of them did, he severed their bonds, rejected them as mates. Gregor didn't erase Micah's mother, though. She did that herself when she discovered his infidelity and subsequently Silas's birth. "I think this calls for celebration, don't you?" "I think this calls for celebration, don't you?" Gregor's voice filtered through the council room doors, followed by a caustic laugh. That was her cue. She strode to the sideboard and lifted the tray already set with a carafe of wine and glittering stemmed glasses. As soon as she passed through the door, Gregor's scent hit her, slipping through her senses like mulled wine. Yes. Her blood rushed, her mouth watered. The High Alpha caught her gaze, his pupils dilating at the sight of her reaction to his presence. And then she nearly dropped her tray. A new scent. No, not new. Old and sweet, musky and deep, and his voice. She didn't know what he said because her blood rushed in her ears. Micah was in that room. She couldn't believe her eyes and stood staring, trying to make sense of it. "He's waiting," one of her escorts hissed, and Gracie forced herself to take a step. Then another. Micah's scent rolled through her, spiking with surprise, fear, then anger, spicy and rich. She didn't look up. She couldn't. If she did, she would throw this tray and run to him, and Gregor would slit her throat, or his, with a letter opener. But in that moment, despite the obvious danger, all she felt was relief. With all the injections, all the manipulations of the cells in her body, she wondered if she'd ever respond to Micah again. And now she knew. It didn't matter how much they forced her to respond to Gregor. Her body had not forgotten Micah. She set the tray on the table, her gaze fixed on the floor. Not new. She knew the role Gregor expected from her. Oh, no, that was wrong. Not now. She knew the role Gregor expected from her, and she played it well. Submissive. Even if rage threatened to burn up her throat and incinerate everything and everyone in front of her. Gregor would assume her heightened reaction was for him. She just needed to pretend a little longer. "Is there anything else you need, High Alpha?" she asked, then flinched as Gregor's hand brushed her cheek. Desire flooded through her, her eyes fluttering closed. No. She didn't want Micah to see her like this, but there was nothing she could do. Her head was clouded, her senses warring with themselves. "Don't touch her." Micah's voice boomed through the room, and her body flooded a second time with heat. He doesn't know. She gritted her teeth, her eyes wild as they snapped up to meet his. "Don't," she willed Micah to listen to her silent message. Gregor's hand slid down her arm, tightening around her waist. Oh no, wrist. Gregor's hand slid down her arm, tightening around her wrist. Shit. Such a mistake to look up. She couldn't take her eyes off Micah. He was just as she'd remembered him. Beautiful, strong. Hers. Gracie wet her lips. allowing the truth to wash over her a second time. Micah was here. If she could only talk to him, tell him what was happening. But Micah could scent her too, couldn't he? He would have noticed her reaction to Gregor. He would think... Go. Go, Gregor snapped, his grip tightening on her arm. Gracie pulled her arm from his and spun, hurrying out of the room. She barely had time to suck in a breath before Gregor's men flanked her on both sides and escorted her to her room. Whatever he'd said through the pack bond, they were taking it seriously. When the door closed to her room, she let out a desperate cry, her skin close to combustion. She wanted to scratch every inch of it off, become so hideous and scarred that Gregor would be forced to choose a new Omega to domesticate. And every time she had thoughts like that, she quickly remembered. There were only 2 reasons she stayed in this prison. One had just appeared in the council room, and one was in her first semester of university. This was not what she signed up for. She never agreed to bond Gregor Cade. But would Micah know that? Would she get the chance to tell him? The tray still sat on the table where Jessa had placed it, and she swiped it off, sending the lid clattering, the biscuits and jam leaving blood-red streaks and crumbs across the tile. The empty syringe rolled, coming to rest next to her foot. She plucked up the paperweight from the end table and smashed it to pieces. Her breathing was so heavy she barely heard the knock at the door. "What?" she barked. Silence. She would not go over there and scan someone in right now. If it was Miss Marin or Jessa, they'd have to wait. Then a deep voice filtered through the door. "Is that the way you greet your high alpha?" Gracie stiffened, her jaw going slack. She didn't have time to breathe, let alone clean up her mess, before Gregor scanned and pushed into the room. He was the only one who had unlimited access to her. He stopped short, noticing the decorative weight in her hands, his eyes flicking to the mess on the floor and the shards of glass glittering around her feet. He blew out a puff of air, then leveled his gaze at her. "I love your fire." His voice was low and calm. The scent of his arousal stung her nose. Then the blood drained from her face when she saw what Gregor held. Then the blood drained from her face when she saw what Gregor held in his hands. A slip of cream fabric and a scent collar that gleamed in matte gunmetal. Gregor set them on the bed like precious gifts. "You'll wear these." She could already feel the cold bite of the metal against her throat. He'd only made her wear it twice, with no rhyme or reason for the command. "Tonight?" His smile held no warmth. "The council requires assurance. They need to see that we're stable, especially now." Gregor ran his fingers over the dress. "Your heat is nearly here. The compounds are working, but we've no more time to waste." He lifted the scent collar, flipping it in his palm. "This will prevent any unfortunate reactions." The collar was no more than a thick necklace, but she hated it almost as much as she hated the syringes. Probably more. At least the injections gave her something to look forward to. Gregor's eyes were cold when he looked up. He knew. As much as she'd tried to hide it, he'd seen how she reacted to Micah in the room earlier. The humiliation hit her like a fist to a bruise. Not only did Gregor plan to control every reaction in her body, he was going to degrade her in front of Micah. Force her to show up collared in front of him. "I don't feel well." Gregor's nostrils flared, and as he stepped toward her, she flinched. The corners of his mouth curled as he broke into a full-throated laugh. Then he sighed, wiping his face with his palm. "You'd feel better if you ate." He picked up the lid to her tray, then crushed the glass under the heel of his boot. "But at least you remembered your dessert." He flashed an approving smile, then leaned in and pressed a slow kiss to her cheek. "I know what you want," he whispered, his breath hot against her skin. "And I will give it to you. Soon." Her body slumped, heat rippling across her skin in heavy waves. Her head lolled, her arms beginning to shake. Yes, hi, Alpha. She hated herself for saying the words, for every time she'd said them over the past months. But there was nothing she could do. She'd exhausted all her options. He held the power, and he'd been smart about exerting it, convincing other pack alphas that the dissension and low breeding rates were because of infertile omegas, that tracking and mitigating these hormonal issues was the only way to protect the packs. It was a small sacrifice of the few for the benefit of the many. While there were plenty who didn't agree with his tactics, there were few who faulted him for trying. Come, Gregor commanded, taking her hand. Gracie did as she was told, and once they were beside the bed, he lifted the collar. Please, let me run first. Quickly, I promise I won't be long. She hated begging, but it was the only thing that seemed to work on Gregor these days. He paused, then set the collar down. Silas will accompany you. An hour only. She nodded, trying to hide her relief. Then you'll dress, he purred in her ear, gripping both sides of her face between his thumb and fingers. The guards will escort you, once you're ready for me. All right, that was chapter 3. All right, it is not a horror story. It is a fantasy romance set in, it's set here in Colorado. And it's kind of like a Beauty and the Beast retelling, if you like those stories, except she doesn't fall for the beast. She falls for his son, as you can see. Okay. Thank you so much for tuning in and for being kind in the chat. I'm so glad that I could be here today. If you have not checked out my channel, I have tons of audiobooks. If you like to listen to stories, that is your place. Go check it out. And I'm sure I will be back recording some more live. So have a great day. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.